Hello, my name is Antoine Van Veen, a current undergraduate student at NYU Stern School of Business and originally from France. I am honored to be part of the global brand convergence. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Conor Grennan. If you don't know Conor, you should. Conor brings the global brand convergence a fascinating and impressive background. He serves as Dean of MBA and graduate students at NYU Stern School of Business, where he is also the creator and head of Generative AI at Stern, an initiative that trains students, faculty, and administration on generative AI. As a student at NYU Stern, I know the important contributions he's making to our school. Conor is LinkedIn Learning's official instructor for AI for Business, Challenges and Opportunities, the lead generative AI trainer for the Chief Executive Media Group, and a founding member of OpenAI's Community Forum, where he's also a featured speaker on optimizing ChatGPT. In addition, Conor is a New York Times and #1 international best-selling author, published in 15 languages, keynote speaker, TEDx speaker, and executive coach. He's also the founder of Next Generation Nepal, an organization that rescues trafficked children and reunites them with their families. Conor has been named a Huffington Post Game Changer of the Year for his humanitarian work in Nepal, and in 2014 was given the Unsung Hero of Compassion Award by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. With a large and dedicated following, Conor has interesting and relevant content he is continuously posting about AI, and I know you will get a lot from following with him on LinkedIn. I know I have. His discussion will focus on rethinking productivity with generative AI and the dimensions of that topic. I know you will learn a lot from Conor, and we appreciate his being part of the global brand convergence. With this, it is my pleasure to welcome Conor Grennan.
Hey everybody, I am Conor Grennan. I am the Dean of Students for the MBA program at NYU Stern School of Business, and I'm also head of Generative AI at Stern, which is an initiative that levels up our students and faculty and administration. But again, you might already have seen that. What I want to talk to you about today a little bit is just how to rethink productivity with generative AI, and specifically things like ChatGPT. This is a sort of a mission that I've been on. I post on LinkedIn every single day, probably. So come find me there, and you can sort of see the things that I'm posting about, because often it's easier to show you what that looks like rather than just talk through it. But I think talking through it actually gets us pretty far. And this is what I mean. Generative AI is so different than anything we've ever seen before. These large language models don't really act like anything we've seen before. So when I say rethinking productivity, I mean because usually when we're rethinking productivity, it's because we've instituted this new tech, this new software, something, and we all have to understand how to use it. And then you have to sort of watch as some people are better than other people and everything like that on it. You've probably been through those transformations. This is different. It's not really a digital transformation. And that's what I want to persuade you of. In fact, I don't really think of this as technology in the traditional sense at all, which is why I've said from the very beginning, my firm belief is that the people who will do really well with generative AI and really make the most of it tend not to be highly technical people, or I should rather say that's not the defining characteristic. The defining characteristic actually tends to be people who are very good at communicating. Marketers, communicators, people like that tend to be excellent at this. Students tend to be excellent at it. And the reason is that those are people that tend to be a couple of things: intellectually curious, and also just very good at speaking, because the single best thing you can do, as we'll get to in a minute, is speak to something like a ChatGPT like a human. And that's what I mean. So what do we mean when we think rethinking productivity? Like, what's so different about this that makes it really both very, very simple in that all you have to do is speak to it like a human, but also complicated in really adapting and getting the most out of it? Well, I want you to visualize something for a second here. I want you to imagine a slide that you may have seen before. And this slide is a chart that shows you how quickly ChatGPT got to 1 million users. Again, you've probably seen this. There's other sort of big tech things on there, right? So it shows Netflix, and Netflix took this long, and Spotify took this long, and Dropbox took this long. And ChatGPT took a mere 3 days to get to 1 million downloads, smashing all previous records. But what's interesting about that, right? Because to me, I think usually that's a slide where people say, oh my gosh, isn't ChatGPT phenomenal? And holy cow. And then they sort of move on, right? But for me, the really interesting thing about that slide are the other things on that list. And I want you to think about this for a second. When we look at, for example, Netflix, right? We know what Netflix is replacing. When we think about Spotify, we know Spotify is replacing, your CD collection. When you think about Dropbox, it's replacing your filing system. All of those things are replacing something else. Airbnb is on that. It's replacing traditional hotels with something else. And the way the brain works, that's why I use the word rethinking. The way the brain works, the brain really needs to understand what it was doing before and what it's doing now. So in other words, when you have something like ChatGPT, which is really unprecedented, the brain gets confused. It doesn't really know what this is replacing. So it tends to go out on a limb and say, well, I guess it was replacing Google, right? Which makes sense if you think about it. When the brain sees Google and the brain sees ChatGPT, they look very similar. And the brain is very good at things like pattern, prediction, automation, things like that, which is why when the brain sees something that looks sort of similar, it just assumes, oh, I guess that's the same as this other thing. And that's the problem with ChatGPT. It looks like Google, and yet it's not Google. In fact, it's wildly different from Google in that it can, give you false information, whereas Google tends to give you factual information. And so people were using this wrong right from the start. And I think that really started to hamper adoption. So why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about the brain instead of giving you 10 use cases or something like that? Because the brain and how we see this is what makes it so complicated. What I found very early on when I started to, work at Stern around this, when I even started to work with other companies and helping them understand it, I ran into a problem right away. Here was the problem. I started training people on the tool, and we would work for an hour or something like that, and people would say, oh, I totally get it, this is amazing, it's going to revolutionize everything. And then something strange would happen there. It wouldn't stick. In other words, I would come back maybe a week later and I would find that they weren't really using ChatGPT, which is sort of strange because it's very, very powerful. So what was the problem? Well, the problem was that you had to sort of break this down to the component parts, right? The only things in this equation were the tool, which is ChatGPT 4, which is very powerful, and the human, because it's not like you need to, there's no adoption. You didn't need to know, Excel or French or calculus. You didn't need to, or like if you're instituting something like Salesforce in your institution or something, you didn't need to learn anything. And that's not like technology. So if the problem wasn't with the tool, which is very powerful, the problem must be with us and our brain. And if we wanted to really get productive on this, and I'm not talking about just using this to rewrite a few emails, I'm talking about real productivity, then we have to rethink our own version of productivity. We have to rethink how we use this tool to get productive. So what does that look like? Well, it can look a lot of different ways, but the way that I like to think of it is it feels like a change management. So think about it this way. If you want to, get in shape or lose weight or something like that, it's not complicated, right? I think we could sort of say that we all totally understand how to do it, right? It's, eat less and exercise. It's simple. Now, do we all have the power to eat less and exercise? Yes. Do we need to know anything to eat less and exercise? No. We also have all these models in terms of physiques that we're all pursuing, to sort of inspire us. And yet, why can't we do it? Or maybe you can do it. Sorry, maybe you're in phenomenal shape and everything like that. But why is it hard for, say, the average person to, for example, lose weight? Because it's not actually about just knowing the information. It's about how to apply it and how to behave differently. Now, why is that hard? It's hard because the brain does not like to change. And again, why have I not started talking yet about how we use ChatGPT? Because if we don't understand why it's hard, we can't make any changes. That's why when we talk about how to use ChatGPT, we want to think about using this productively, but not focusing on the productivity. So here's what I mean by that. And this is where I want to kind of get into the meat of actually how we're going to change. I'm guessing a lot of you out there are probably pretty good at communications. I'm guessing there's a whole heap of you out there who are probably great at things like marketing and things like that, right? Well, here's the big unlock for me, right? When I was working with people and trying to use it, the way that I used to talk to people about it was, hey, here's how you use it, and I was talking about work productivity and everything. Here's the thing. People tend to not really be that inspired by being more productive at work. I mean, they do, you want to get promoted and everything like that. But unless you're really working for yourself or a nonprofit or something where you really see the benefits, it's not the most motivating thing in the world to make, for example, your company more money. So what is interesting? Well, social experiment after social experiment has showed us that it's really the creativity side that people just really want to pursue. So I started taking a different approach to rethinking productivity with ChatGPT and moving away from the productivity itself and deciding to veer toward the creativity part. And here's what I want to sort of hammer home here. If you want to learn how to use ChatGPT, if you want to teach others how to use ChatGPT, work on the creative side of it. So, for example, my son is 14. He has used it for all these really cool things at school. With permission, he's not cheating on anything. But for example, he had to do a project on German immigration in the 1850s to the United States. So instead of just reading about that, he asked ChatGPT to actually create a German immigrant. He created a character and he started talking to the German immigrant. Hey, you just got off the boat. What do you see? Oh, well, I see horses here and I see smells this and this. Great. Where are you going right now? Well, I'm going to the Lower East Side. Okay, look to your left. What do you see? Well, I see. And this person was describing their entire surroundings. It brought this whole thing to life. What kid wouldn't want to learn history that way? And the same thing with Shakespeare. We made like Hamlet, some like cool guy hanging out in a cafe that we could talk to. We made, biology into something where the parts of the cell were Marvel superheroes, and then the bad things, cancers and viruses and things like that, were all like villains from the Marvel universe. And we asked ChatGPT to actually create like a cinematic battle scene, and it sort of attributed the characteristics of these Marvel superheroes to each part of the cell that really matched up with that superhero. These are ways that you can learn. This is ways that you can use it. And here's the thing. That's a far cry from saying, hey, here, let's write some emails. And you do it. But when you really get excited about it, that's when the dopamine starts hitting. Again, that's why I say rethinking, because it's all about how we think. So that's number one. You really want to, when you are learning it, think creatively, get excited about like the different possibilities. People say, just practice on it. That's not helpful. You can't just practice. You need to know what you're practicing on. So take assignments in school, see how creative you can get. In fact, ask ChatGPT how creative you can make this assignment. What would it take to make this assignment really interesting? What would it take? I do this all the time with my kids, right? The tectonic plates. We ended up like writing like a whole love story between tectonic plates under the earth and things like that. We would do just any number of comprehension quizzes, and it was just wild. But what it really did was it showed my kids at least the power of this and got them using it in a way that then when they really needed to apply it for something useful, they were ready to do it because they had learned through creativity. That's why I say marketers, creators, people in communication will be so good at using this tool if you haven't figured that already. Don't just stick to the use cases that you hear from people. Create your own, but you don't have to rely on your own creativity. Ask ChatGPT to be your creative co-pilot. Ask ChatGPT what you should even be asking ChatGPT. That's the exciting part. And I just sort of like want to, having kind of given you a big, broad overview on how I think about training and how I think about learning, I want to give you sort of like leave you with kind of this 3 points that I find are really critical for using something like generative AI and ChatGPT well. And I'm not talking about a lot of other tools, because really you have to master large language models. If, natural language, all that. If you can do that, then everything else will come much easier. So there's something that I created called the HTG principle. And the HTG principle is hi, thanks, great. So let me just take you through those for a second. The hi part, I encourage people to say hi to it. Now, does that make it answer better or anything like that? No. So why do we say hi to it? It's not because we change what it does. It's because we change how we think about it. The single most important thing you can do when you're talking to these language models is treat it like a human. If you can speak to it like a human, that's the best thing. So why don't we? We don't, and for the same reasons we don't talk to a baby like a college professor. It's not a college professor. And your brain does not let you believe it is, because your brain takes you back into reality. And when you're looking at a computer screen, and you say, speak to this like a human, it's very hard, because your brain is like, but that's not a human. So it kind of pulls it away. When you say hi and speak in as natural a language as you can, it gets you keeping in that mode and mindset of speaking to this like a human. And that's very, very powerful. The results are going to be absolutely amazing. If you remember nothing else, try to remember that. Again, you don't literally have to say hi to it. I just think it's a good practice and exercise. HT. T is thanks. What do I mean by that? Well, when you thank it, by the way, I'll bet a lot of you do. I'll bet some of you at least thank these kinds of tools after you get a response from them. But saying thanks does a couple of things, right? First of all, it keeps you, again, in that human type mindset, which you're going to get the best results out of. But also, it does a thing that we call linguistic matching, right? And linguistic matching is when you actually kind of like take on the personality of your partner, and you start to respect your dialogue partner. If you do that, and that's what kind of thanking is, it's sort of showing gratitude and it's giving respect to your partner. And if you're doing that, even with a human, but especially with something like ChatGPT, your brain is saying, this is somebody worthwhile. This is somebody worth listening to. And you pay more attention and you give more weight, and then you treat it with more respect. And then it's not that it needs to treat you with more respect. It's not that. It's just that you get yourself into a better and more productive dialogue. I just see it happening over and over again. And then the G is the great. The great part is really important. Great means giving it feedback. I see all the time people will say, hey, give me 10 ideas for this new shoe company or something like that. And it will do it. And then what people will do is they'll be like, I don't know if I like those. Give me another 10 ideas. But what is it supposed to do? Did you like those ideas? Did you not like? Otherwise, it's just going to be like, let's recreate it. You have to give it feedback. So let's say you like the first, third, and sixth ideas. Say, hey, I like the first, third, and sixth ideas. Here's what I liked about them. I didn't like number 8 because it did this. Give it feedback. Say, oh my gosh, that was great. Oh, that was fantastic. Or, oh, I really didn't like that. Whatever it is, the more feedback you give it, the more information you give it in general, the better it's going to be. You have to guide this. And then once you're saying great and you're doing all that, you're iterating. And the best thing you can do is iterate, but iterate with feedback. Give it feedback, iterate. Give it feedback, iterate. There's just it just changes the way that you interact with it. And I promise it will change the output. So that's really what I kind of wanted to say. I wanted to kind of give you a broad overview as to sort of like why this is so much in our mindset about how we think about this and why it is hard. Because if you don't know why it's hard, you're not going to be able to get the most out of it. That's what I mean by rethinking productivity. And finally, those are the HTG principle. Those were just some tips on the best sort of just mechanically way of getting the most out of something like ChatGPT. Thank you for having me. It was great to be here. I know that this is just such a productive conference, and I know that we're going to come out of here all learning a lot, and especially with something like large language models, this is really going to change everything. And if we can lead the way, I think we're really going to make a huge difference in this world. I really believe that. Thanks for having me, everybody.